Welcome into a January 14th edition of Daily Faceoff Live, streaming live over on the DFO YouTube, where I see a couple of Ask DFO questions are in already. You can also have your say on our poll question, which is up now. That is all about the Calder. We're talking about that with Steven Ellis in a bit. But first, I need to tell you that the show is brought to you by Bet365. Download the app today. Use the promo code NATION. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Tyler Yaremchuk and Frank Saravalli with you, rocking his nice Vermont hockey sweater. Shout out to our boy Brendan. Looking good here on a Tuesday, Frank.
Yeah, man, some tough news to digest this morning already. Emil Heineman from the Montreal Canadiens struck by a car on Monday evening in Salt Lake City as a pedestrian. Still waiting on some more details, but tough news for him. He's going to be out 3 to 4 weeks with an upper body injury, which sources believe is a wrist injury. And man, this guy was playing so well. He had 9 points in a 10-game stretch from December 12th to January 3rd as the Canadiens rocketed up the standings. So reached out to Salt Lake City Police Department for some more information and details, but certainly some scary news this morning.
Yeah, definitely. And weirdly enough, the second time this week we've had a car accident related thing in the NHL. Michael Bunting in Pittsburgh earlier in the week as well. There was an incident by the arena. So sending our best to Emil Heineman. We're actually going to talk about him in a little bit with Steven Ellis as well. But first, Frank, let's talk about one of the big results from last night. It was out in Edmonton as the Oilers and Kings renewed their rivalry on Connor McDavid's 28th birthday. And hey, he scored the only goal of the hockey game. It was, I wouldn't call it a snooze fest, but a little low event last night between the Oilers and Kings. Let's start with Connor McDavid. On his 28th birthday, he scores the GWG. Oilers fans were singing happy birthday in Rogers Place, but an interesting number. How many points have you produced by your 28th birthday? And we got a little board here of where Connor McDavid ranks. Always a good reminder of just how dominant the first 10 years of McDavid's career has been. Yzerman, Lemieux, Gretzky, good company for number 97.
So does last night's point count or not? Because last night would be 1,041, right?
Yeah, last night's point would count, I believe, or maybe it's before your 28th birthday. Either way, I mean, whether he's tied with Yzerman or one above him, he's in the top 4.
Yeah, and look, I'm sure someone watching is like, yeah, okay, tell me something I don't know. Connor McDavid is awesome. Here's the thing, though. When you start to see numbers like this, when you start to put into larger focus his career, and yes, the glaring thing missing is the Stanley Cups, or how about just start with one Stanley Cup? But when you recognize that should everything, remain all systems go in terms of health, that Connor McDavid is going to become just the second player in NHL history to 2,000 points. For me, if I had to determine, you put a gun to my head and you said, what's the NHL's Mount Rushmore? You only get 4 spots of all-time players. Connor McDavid gets one of those spots. His head's on Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, I'm with you, obviously, on that one. I want to talk a little bit.
It'd be more fun if you weren't. You're like, Oilers fan, and I'm like, nope, you're out. Sorry, I'm drawing the line. Like, we're gonna go Wayne, Mario, Gordy, and Bobby Orr, which is like totally like, it's a fine pick. Like, no one would even argue with that. I just think he's playing himself into that pantheon.
Yeah, I do. You are right. It's one of those questions that almost really doesn't have an incorrect answer. I want to talk about the other side of this, the LA Kings, Frank. The start of the season obviously went so well, and the Kings have stayed pretty consistent since their hot start to the year. And I know a lot of Kings fans will sit there and say, hey, Drew Doughty's coming back. And we spent some time last week talking about how they're probably, even with Doughty returning, looking for a puck mover. Watching them last night, though, one of the issues was not just generating high quality looks, and they had a couple. Quentin Byfield hit a post, Adrian Kempe had a couple of good looks, but it was sustained offensive zone pressure. And I guess part of that could be helped by adding another puck mover to the blue line. But since December 1st, the Kings are 20th in goals for per game. Is this maybe more than a one need deadline for Rob Blake? Do they maybe need to look at adding some extra scoring?
Yeah, I could see that for sure. And when you look at this team also from a pure power play perspective, you go, oof, Kings 29th in the league, 14.9%. I mean, they were just passed by the Flyers, who somehow, I don't even know how it's possible. The Flyers scored power play goals in back-to-back games, multiple power plays. Like, what is we see these fires here? Is the world truly ending with the Flyers scoring power play goals in back-to-back games? But I say that in jest. And so then you start to piece things together from the Kings and you go, well, if Doughty comes back, and then you can kind of reshuffle your pairs, and you can get Gavrikov back on the left side, and all of a sudden things kind of look a little bit more normalized, and Doughty then gives your team a power play boost. Well, do you really need it? Or what? Like, I could certainly see adding a little bit more scoring punch being on the list. And as I was going through the exercise determining East and West objectives, and we posted that East story yesterday, that you could certainly see adding a little bit more scoring punch.
Yeah, and again, a 1-0 game last night. The flip side of that, the Oilers' blue line, which has obviously been a big talk, actually held pretty well. Chris Knoblauch goes with an 11-7 approach last night, but one guy, and Frank, you were on it from the start of the season, Ty Emberson, he has really started to develop nicely on this Oilers blue line, and it's been interesting. They've been protecting 1-goal leads in each of their last 2 games. It is Emberson on the ice in the final minute of each of them.
Yeah, and I wouldn't touch Emberson. I'd leave him exactly where he is on the lineup card. It's Troy Stetcher would be the target to replace. No offense to him, but there's definitely an upgrade out there.
Yeah, let's continue the deadline talk then. The latest deadline countdown article is up now on DailyFaceoff.com. Our colleague Anthony Trudeau taking a shot at 5 unsung or potential unsung heroes for this upcoming deadline. And I think it's a fascinating read because every year we always get obsessed with the big names, right? The Brock Nelsons of this year, and you can go back through the past. And when we talked last week about the moves that Stanley Cup contenders have made at the deadline, sometimes it's that under the radar move that ends up paying off the most. So let's start with the blue liners that are on his list. He's got Brian Dumoulin from the Anaheim Ducks, a pending UFA with a $3.15 million cap hit, and David Savard, another pending UFA, 34 years old, out in Montreal. Is there one of those two that you maybe like a bit more than the other for a contender?
Yeah, it's definitely not David Savard. Look, I think his best hockey's in his rearview mirror. I think he's slowed significantly, and I think anytime he's been asked to play major minutes for the Canadiens this season, anytime he gets to 20, 21 minutes, he gets exposed in a big, big way. So I wouldn't be trading for David Savard under almost any circumstances. However, I really like Brian Dumoulin, and I think with his Stanley Cup pedigree, 2-time Cup champion with the Pittsburgh Penguins, he was an unsung hero of those teams. He's steady. He doesn't, obviously looking at his point production, he's not going to give you a ton at the offensive end, but he actually still moves pretty well. I saw the Ducks play in person a few weeks ago, and I was quite impressed with how Dumoulin was skating. So he'd be a guy that I would take a long look at as someone that also probably isn't going to, as an unsung hero guy, cost you an arm and a leg.
Yeah, and hey, if you can get the Ducks to maybe even retain 50% on that, they do have a couple extra slots. They've only retained on Cam Fowler. Then a lot of contenders, I think, would like Brian Dumoulin for about 1.5, 1.6 million. On the forwards, Frank, there's 3 on the list. Ryan Donato, who you talked about on the DFO rundown yesterday with Jason Gregor, having a great season, a guy who's bounced around the league a ton, but is finding success in Chicago. Another rental would be Brandon Tanev, someone who, again, bottom 6 guy, but could really help out a team on their penalty kill. And then the other name that Anthony put out there was Scott Lawton in Philadelphia. $3 million a year. He has term. I call him more of a middle 6 guy versus a bottom 6 guy because I think there is still a little bit of upside, a guy who can pop up your lineup if you need him to in a pinch. But term, that's what I think should be drawing teams to a guy like Lawton.
But it's also why the Flyers should keep him, right? He's under a manageable deal. He's a fabric, heart and soul player of that team. He's been there a long, long time. I think maybe second only to Sean Couturier in terms of Flyers tenure, and someone that just gets it. And I understand those are reasons why teams would want to trade for him, but why not go after Brandon Tanev instead? I think a much lower acquisition price. Tanev can still move. That forechecking prowess and ability, his intensity that he brings to the lineup. And yeah, he could chip in the odd goal every now and again. I think Tanev is an ideal trade deadline target for some team looking to improve their bottom 6. He's a guy that you can plug right in and fits in on any team.
Yeah, I think Tanev, again, if Seattle keeps money, there could actually be a bit of a bidding war. We had someone in here, Jeremiah, says Tanev on the Leafs.
Yeah, I was just going to say, brother. Yeah, reunite him with his brother. And not only that, but as the Leafs look to reinvent that third line, if you can fulfill a third line center role, grab one of the other guys that we potentially talked about yesterday and on the DFO rundown, that'd be pretty interesting fit as well.
Yeah, we're going to continue along with our mid-season awards talk. Frank, we'll talk Calder with Steven Ellis. We'll talk Selke in a second, but let's make one up here. Let's go mid-season move of the year. 41, 42 games for pretty much every team around the league. That's a good enough sample size to look back on June, July, and August and pass some judgment onto general managers around the NHL, but I guess in a positive way. I'll throw it to you first. Give me maybe your watch list, the ones that you were debating, and then which one right now is your move of the year.
Yeah, so I thought about this a lot, and there were a couple true win-win trades. Like, it looks like that Darcy Kemper and Pierre-Luc Dubois trade is actually working out pretty well for both sides. Kemper has been excellent. Dubois seems to be reinvigorated in Washington, and the term on those contracts, while not apples to apples necessarily, there was a lot of risk involved for both sides, and that seems to have been a fit. How about the Jacob Chikrin trade for Nick Jensen? And I know there were picks involved, but still, that looks like a deal that both sides are also very happy with so far. Chikrin has, already a double-digit goal scorer as a cap. Jensen has really helped solidify and stabilize that Sens back end, particularly in a year in which they've been hit by some injuries, and he's been a strong constant. But to me, the move of the year is actually the one that wasn't made. And that's the Minnesota Wild. Go back to my trade targets board. Philip Gustafsson was on my trade targets board for months. They could have easily moved him, probably in exchange for something relatively inexpensive. It's a goalie, so a third-round pick, whatever it might have been. And they were like, you know what? We'll just hang on to him and see what happens. And also a year in which there's some flux, right? This is Marc-Andre Fleury's likely his last year. He said that. They've got Jesper Wallstedt on the way. Who's going to help hold down the fort for the Minnesota Wild moving forward? They hang on to Gustafsson, and I just filled out my midseason awards ballot. Gustafsson's on my Vezina ballot. He's been excellent so far for the Wild this year. So we always say sometimes the best trades you make are the ones that you don't. And in this case, that's the move of the year for me. Where would the Minnesota Wild be right now had they traded Philip Gustafsson?
That is a great question. They probably aren't in that conversation with the big four in the Central if they aren't getting this kind of goaltending from Gustafsson. I had a few, Frank. I thought about the Jake Gensel one to go the free agent route. I think Tampa Bay, again, not an easy decision to say we're letting go of Steven Stamkos after everything he's done in the organization. But to get Gensel younger and now to be getting this production from him, that move seems to be working out really, really well. But judging a free agent deal in year one can also be a little bit tricky. The two trades I had, one was the Patrick Laine deal for Montreal. I know he hasn't played a ton, but 9 goals in 14 games for Laine, and they got a second-round pick to take him. Yes, they had to trade Jordan Harris, but when you look at all the pieces on their blue line, he was trending more towards being a bit of a spare part. For them to get a second-round pick, I think about the work they did with the Sean Monahan deal, getting a first and then trading Monahan for another first-round pick. This Montreal front office, if they keep pulling off moves like this, it'll pay off for them with this rebuild and coming out of the rebuilding phase, I should say.
Yeah, and I'm going to throw one more trade that involved the Montreal Canadiens at you that was way under the radar, but Jonathan Kovacevic and the job that he's done for the New Jersey Devils, they were expecting him to be a guy that kind of came in during training camp, maybe competed for a spot, maybe not. And he's entered the lineup and hasn't left. So I think they got him for a 5th-round pick as Montreal was trying to figure out what their decor numbers looked like. And he's been awesome.
Yeah. And as you were talking about where would Minnesota be without Philip Gustafsson, that got me thinking about just one more to quickly throw your way. Where would Utah be if they hadn't made that trade for Mikhail Sergachev? When you look at how banged up their blue line was, Frank, and maybe it's not the move of the year because they did give up a decent amount to get him with Connor Geekie and JJ Moser's playing well in Tampa Bay, a 2nd-round pick in there as well. But with using hindsight, with the injuries they went through, if Mikhail Sergachev's not on that blue line, Utah might be real close to the basement.
Agree. He's stepped up. And, when I saw this trade, the first thing I thought of was, what does Tampa know that everyone else doesn't? Is he just not going to fully recover from that gruesome leg injury that he had last year? It's been no problem. He's been everything Utah could have hoped for and more. And you're right, with those injuries that they've had, if they didn't have him, man, that'd be tough. And by the way, Moser's been out too for a little bit. So that part's been a little bit more difficult for Tampa. And by the way, what does Tampa do moving forward? So you trade Sergachev, Hedman's getting older, McDonough is on hole 17. Then what? Who's gonna be carrying that and keeping that championship window open for Tampa? I just don't see it. That's why I really wonder about the Sergachev deal from Tampa's perspective.
Yeah, I'm with you. I know we talked Norris yesterday, but I also filled out my midseason awards ballot for Daily Faceoff, and I had Sergachev at 4 on my Norris ranking. Is that a bridge too far?
Not a bridge too far. He's been really good. He didn't crack my top 5 when I was looking at it, filling out the last 2 spots on my ballot. I went with Josh Morrissey and Shea Theodore, and I know that their offensive numbers are good, but that's just kind of like the one, like Sergachev's being asked to do so much that the points are coming at a sacrifice.
Yeah, our chat wanted us to give some love. Broberg and Holloway from J-Rock, who is our resident Blues fan in the chat. I mean, again, early on with those two, but Dylan Holloway certainly had.
Tyler. It's all right. Huh? I said, J-Rock, all you have to do is tweak Tyler. Say Broberg and Holloway, and every Oiler fan is shook.
That's fair. All right, before we get to Steven Ellis, let's talk a little bit about the Selke, Frank. At times, it can turn into a little bit of a reputation award, I think, and that's not to say Alexander Barkov doesn't deserve to be the favorite. He's running away with it when you look at the odds board, but I wanted to ask you, yeah, so you had someone else at the top, and I guess I'll let you go first, then I'll make my point, but give me your top 3.
Yeah, so look, I love Alexander Barkov, full stop, but he's missed 1/4 of the first half. He's missed 10 games. And that means that he would have needed to be, when he's on the ice, 25% better than everyone else. And I just don't know that that's been the case, but we've got to give some love to his teammate in Sam Reinhart, who also does a big job on the Florida Panthers penalty kill. He's maybe the second smartest player in the league next to Barkov, which when you think about how well they play together, that's the makings of something special, pairing up a couple brainiacs. Sean Monahan, God, what can you say about Monahan and the season that he's had for the Columbus Blue Jackets? He leads the Blue Jackets in penalty killing minutes. He's tied with Jack Eichel for second in the league in 5-on-5 goal differential. He's been so good. And there were certainly some other candidates to put in here in the third spot. Could have gone with, pick someone around the league. Anthony Cirelli's been so good. Nico Hischier. But I'm going to go with Anze Kopitar, the best season that no one's talking about. He's taking a lesser role in the PK this year for the Kings, which nice thing to take off his plate, make his workload a little bit easier, but still a truly dominant player in the NHL when it comes to 5-on-5.
I remember a couple of years ago when Jacob Slavin won the Lady Byng, and everyone in the hockey world kind of went like, why are we not giving this to defensemen more? And that's kind of where I'm thinking with wingers and winning the Selke, Frank. I promised you a Selke fun fact. The last time a winger won the Selke was 2003 when Yuri Lettinen won the award. So it's been 21 years since a winger has won the Selke. Maybe it's time.
So who's your guy?
I like Reinhart too, although I was, again, just digging into some numbers and stuff, very surprised at Seth Jarvis's numbers. That's a guy who you think of as a goal scorer first, but he puts together some great defensive metrics for Carolina.
He does, and Jordan Stahl has been a perennial guy for me on my Norris list, or my Selke list, that I just don't think has gotten nearly enough love.
Yeah. That's fair. Not that the words Selke and fun are ever synonymous, but I thought that was a fun fact, Frank. Let's move along and talk about an actual fun award. How about the Calder Trophy? We're going to get into it with the next wave, which is brought to you by Charm Diamond Centers. You can check out their large selection of Canadian lab-grown diamonds, mine diamonds, and more by visiting them at charmdiamondcenters.com. Always a pleasure to welcome in our Daily Faceoff prospect analyst, Steven Ellis, to the show. And let's kick it right off, Steven. Halfway point of the year. Give me your Calder pick. Give me who else is on your ballot.
Well, right now, for me, number one, it's Lane Hutson. And I think just the stuff that he's able to do as a defenseman is incredible. I wrote before the season started, like, don't be surprised if we see him go down to the Laval Rocket, because he's such a unique player in the way that he moves the puck, the way he outskates his opponents and forces them to have to really react to his plays. But clearly it's not been a problem for him. He's been able to adjust so well. He's playing heavy minutes. I think as other teams start to figure out how to play against him in the next couple of years, we'll see how how good of a defenseman he is, but he's truly one of my favorite players in the NHL because just no one brings the entertainment value from the point like him outside of maybe Quinn Hughes or Cale Makar. Then you look at the other guys here. Obviously, Celebrini, got a huge case here. He missed some time, didn't miss a beat at all. That adjustment going right from college as a freshman right into the NHL, clearly not an issue. Matvei Michkov's been near the scoring, the top of the scoring for a long time here. And of course, Dustin Wolf, the best goalie in this draft. So this is probably one of the more fun Calder classes that I've ever paid attention to. And I think it's because, Lane Hutson might be one right now. Celebrini was number one the month before. Michkov was number one the month before that. Like, it's changing so much. And I think that's going to be really cool heading into the stretch run.
Yeah, no doubt. And my ballot looks a bit different than yours. I have Celebrini 1, Hutson 2, and Dustin Wolf 3. I guess my big thing is, why do you think, and I ask this knowing the historic sort of pace that Hudson's been playing at as a rookie defenseman and what kind of conversation he's putting himself in, but why do you give the nod to Hutson over Celebrini?
I think just because, with the way Hudson's playing, you look at how much better Montreal has been in the last month. And I just wrote about it earlier today, where once Hutson really started to get hot, he was playing 22 minutes a night. The Canadians went from being second last in the NHL to just outside of a wild card spot. So he's been just as important as pretty much anybody in that lineup, whether it be Cole Caulfield, Nick Suzuki, and to be playing 22 minutes a night, 21 minutes, whatever it actually is, as a defenseman. Like, obviously we saw what Brock Faber did last year, but when it came to Hutson, I think there's always been those questions of those defensive issues. And it really hasn't been as big of an issue as I think a lot of people thought. And, you look at Celebrini's numbers, obviously so important for the Sharks, but you also look at the Montreal's been actively been way better since Lane Hutson started to get hot.
Mm-hmm. So as you think about the second half of the year, and you just talked about how much this race has changed already, who has the chance to really push themselves into the mix?
It's always tough for a goaltender to go out there and win the Calder Trophy, but I think Dustin Wolf's got a huge argument here. Like, when I'm looking at this top four, like, it's really, really close. And I think with Wolf, you see those numbers there. He's putting up just a lot of the same performances that we saw make him so valuable in the AHL. And early in the season, he wasn't getting a ton of tough starts. Like, he'd play against like Chicago or San Jose and things like that. But we saw him shut out the Florida Panthers. We saw him go out there and beat the Canucks. Like, he's had some tougher assignments in the last few weeks. And I think that's really important as they get really more comfortable with him. Obviously, you look there, will the Flames make a change in goal and then make Dustin Wolf that undisputed number one? But I think for me, not only is he, like, my prediction was at the halfway point, he'd be that number one goalie, and he's playing like a number one goalie right now. And again, goalie prospects are my favorite because it's so hard for them to stand out. But what we're seeing from him this year is true greatness already.
Yeah. Let me throw some numbers at you quickly. Heading into last night's game, Wolf had started the last 3, 4 of 5, 6 of 8, and 8 of 11. He was 6-1-1 in his last 8. And his last 5 games, he had a .940 save percentage. So some incredibly impressive numbers from Wolf.
Yeah, like, we were always wondering how he was going to transfer over. He's a smaller goalie, but clearly it hasn't been an issue. And it's a good time to be watching goalies because you look at what Askarof's doing. We're still kind of waiting for Wallstead to see what he's able to do. Sebastian Kosa's coming up, and we might have 2 goalies taken in the first round of the 2025 NHL draft. So this is a good time to be watching goalie prospects.
Not to hijack the Calder talk, but if you're the Flames, and I know because Steven watches like Kazakhstan Hockey League, whatever that is, what would you do with Devin Cooley in the AHL who's been lighting it up?
I that's a guy that hasn't had a ton of NHL experience, right? So it'll be interesting, but he's obviously someone that could be a decent backup, a good depth piece for any team maybe needing some extra goaltending at the deadline, or if they do move on from Dan Vladar, I think he's ready to get the look because he's looked so good. And Calgary's had some really good goalies the last couple of years in the AHL. Oscar Dansk is another one, but I think Cooley's been able to kind of really elevate his career at a level that we didn't see when he was in the San Jose organization.
Maybe not best rookie of the year, Steven, but what about most underappreciated or maybe least talked about? Who's someone that's maybe flown under the radar that you think's having a really good year?
Well, it's Emil Heineman, and obviously today's news definitely makes it a little tougher to look at there. But you look at the fact that this is a player who was brought in. He was going to go out there and bring the energy, make himself tough to play against. He's not a massive player, but he's strong, and he's really difficult to beat in the corners, and he's got that two-way responsibility. but he's also on pace for, had he not missed, if he's not wasn't going to miss time, he was on pace for 20 goals this year with Jake Evans, and just made a really good line. I believe that's their fourth line. And that's a thing, Jake Evans is looking so good, but I don't know if he would be as successful if it wasn't for the way that Heineman's able to take some of that responsibility away from him. And he was a top 10 rookie for me this year, just because he's been one-on-one matchups defensively. Like, he just does it all so well. And the fact that he's scoring at the rate he was, I don't think anyone saw that coming, because he's never been a goal scorer at any level. Like, he never got double-digit goals pretty much throughout most of his career in Europe at the pro level. So, it's been cool to see.
Last one for you, moving outside of the NHL, another sort of made-up award for you to give us. Your top prospect of the first half. Who's someone, and they can be draft eligible, they can be drafted already, but who's someone who's maybe changed your opinion of them in the first half?
Well, it's definitely Kieran Walton, who I mentioned as one of my biggest snubs off of Team Canada. And it wasn't like he kind of came out of nowhere by the time of Canada's camp happened, but he's the third top scorer in the OHL this year. And you look at the numbers last year in his draft eligible season, 43 points. He was a later pick as a result. This year, he's already destroyed that with 69 points. Nice. And he's just continuously going at a rate here where we're going to be talking about 110, 120 points on a Sudbury Wolves team that's been missing one of their best offensive threats all year long in Quentin Musty. So a really good pickup. He's 6'6". He's a good skater. He's a power forward that I remember watching him in his OHL draft year. It's like, man, if he could figure out how to score and get that offensive ability unlocked, he's going to be so good. And right now, the Winnipeg Jets are looking really good for taking him.
Yeah, is having a hell of a year. Those numbers are crazy. Steven, as always, appreciate your time, man. Thanks for doing this. And we'll chat next week when I think you're going to have an updated draft rankings.
Yep, they come out Friday. Can't wait.
Perfect. Thanks, Steven. Along to our poll question brought to you by Dominion Lending Centers. Is your mortgage up for renewal? Lock in the best rates by speaking with one of their mortgage experts at dominionlending.ca. Frank, we asked everybody Celebrini or the field for the Calder, and 56% of the vote on Twitter was still leaning towards Macklin Celebrini. What do you think of the public backing Celebrini?
Well, I understand why they would, but given what we just talked about and how much this has changed, or how quickly this has changed, I think you have to leave it open to the field. And the idea that, I don't know, it's not that Celebrini can't continue to play well, but what happens if he gets hurt, or what happens if one of these guys just blows by him with their production? Yeah. I think Dustin Wolf has a really good chance to climb up those rankings here, especially if he can play the Calgary Flames into a playoff spot. It's going to be the repeat of Steve Mason.
Ooh, that's a spicy one.
Who's the last goalie to win the Calder?
Yeah, right now, Bet365, by the way, you can get in on Celebrini versus the field, with the field paying 2-1. We got some inbox questions for you, Frank. We got 2 questions today about one team, so I'll float them your way. But Joe worded it nicely. Bjorkstrand and Burakovsky from the Kraken. Basically, do you think there's a chance, and we talked about the rentals on the Kraken, but there's those two. Jaden Schwartz has one more year after this one. So does Jordan Eberle. Jared McCann's got a couple of seasons, although I doubt they would move him. But do you think there's a chance Ron Francis does more than just move his rentals?
Well, he should. And to be honest, they should be, whoever's running the Kraken should be putting his feet to the fire saying, what are we doing here? What's the plan? How are we going to attack this? How are we going to go from a team that's just kind of here and in the mix to actually being a team that contends? And I just think the term with these guys is probably going to be more problematic than helpful, because you look at their production and it's really just okay. So to say that those guys are out there and available, I mean, Bjorkstrand's been better than Burakovsky, but our team's beating down your door to get these guys. That'd be the big question I'd ask.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Let's move along to our daily bets, brought to you by Bet365. Download the app today. Use the promo code NATION, whatever the moment. It's never ordinary at Bet365. I got one pick for tonight, even though it is a busy slate, but I like this same game parlay. Columbus taking on Philly. Philly burned me yesterday by beating the Panthers 4-3, but tonight Philly is going out on the road where they are 9-13 straight up. Columbus on home ice, 14-8 straight up. And then the player props I mixed in here, Voronkov, 2+ shots on goal. He's done this in 9 consecutive hockey games. And Werenski has an assist in 5 of his last 6 games. So give me Columbus to win with a couple of shot props mixed in there to come out to +275 using the same game parlay tool on Bet365. To wrap up the show, Frank, garbage time. You handled it today. What do you got for me?
Well, we, in celebration of Eric Stahl and his number 12 going to the rafters in Raleigh, they had a little alumni game, and always fun to see some of the clips, but always good to see Rod the Bod. I mean, NHL head coach, fastest to 300 wins. He doesn't take a day off ever in the gym. And you see Mike Commodore taking a peek at those tree trunks there. I mean, guy's just an absolute specimen, and the nickname is well earned, and love to see him back on the ice scoring goals, number 17.
Yeah, I love that teams are, and not necessarily a new thing. Maybe I'm just seeing it more with social media, but like the Sharks did this for Joe Thornton, and they had like the little arena was full. Like fans love it. I like that teams are doing these alumni games for the jersey retirements. Yeah,
and the Rangers and Islanders just played an alumni game over the weekend as well. Like it's really funny, like just trying to explain like some of the long-time or all-time greats to my son, and like going through that process. But like when he's 25 or 30, he'll understand, all the players that he grew up watching and the emotional connection that every fan base has to those players, because there's really nothing quite like seeing a guy on a Jumbotron, but it's even better to see them back on the ice or on the field again.
Yeah, like I said, busy night tonight in the NHL with some winning streaks on the line. Detroit looking for their 8th in a row. They host the San Jose Sharks. Calgary's looking for their 4th in a row. They're taking on the St. Louis Blues. Columbus putting their 4-game heater on the line, like I said, against Philadelphia as well. So plenty of action tonight on a Tuesday around the NHL, and we'll be right back here tomorrow to break it all down. We still got John Goins and Carter Hutton coming up later this week, so make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our shows. We'll chat with everybody again tomorrow at noon Eastern. What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you're going to want to hit the subscribe button to not miss any of our content, from daily live shows with Frank Saravalli to analysis from former NHLers to exclusive interviews with some of the biggest names in the hockey world on Frankly Speaking. You're going to want to hit that subscribe button and stay up to date with everything going on in the hockey world.